Okay. Can you stop the screen share for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, folks. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here and being a part of these sessions. So on behalf of a course called Wetland Ecology, Biodiversity and Conservation, we are arranging these events to support the first World Species Congress. And we chose to highlight the wetlands because of their importance in terms of conservation for a species, but also for all the other ecological functions that they perform. So along with me, I have a couple of colleagues from the course here who are going to be co-hosts, supporting behind the scenes for all the questions that you may have. So if you have any questions, you could put that in the chat. And today's interactions will be with Satwik. I'm sure in the registration, you would have seen his profile. He's an artist and he's using art and different forms of art, from illustrations to graphic novels to curating art exhibitions, to talk about conservation issues, and within conservation issues, especially social justice. And this intermingling of art and justice, social justice, I think is very important, where we look at how do we awaken people, how do we share information with people, not just with scientific data, but also with what we call soft humanities, right? So how does art play into that? I think that's a pretty important part. And before I hand over to Satwik, I will just show you a short clip on wetlands to kind of give you the perspective of what the wetlands are, and just so that everybody is on the same page. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. So just give me a moment and I will share the screen with you. It's just a short clip, about 3 minutes.
What makes a wetland a wetland? The simplest answer is water. Wetlands are found throughout the world wherever land and water mix. There are many different types of wetlands, but a wetland is not a puddle, nor is it a lake, pond, stream, or river. And
Can everybody hear it?
Yes, Madhu.
Yes.
yes,
Is it too fast by any chance? No? Okay. Yeah, all right.
What makes a wetland a wetland? The simplest answer is water. Wetlands are found throughout the world wherever land and water mix. There are many different types of wetlands, but a wetland is not a puddle, nor is it a lake, pond, stream, or river. And while water is certainly important, wetlands are also defined by their soils and plants. Wetlands are areas of land saturated with water. This means that wetlands hold and absorb water similar to a sponge. But not all wetlands are always saturated. The movement of water to and from a wetland is known as its hydrology. While some wetlands are almost always underwater, others are rarely flooded. Many people think of wetlands as muddy, but wetlands can often look dry for much of the year. So all wetlands are wet, but not all wetlands are always wet. Wetlands also have hydric soils. These are frequently flooded or saturated soils. Most non-wetland soils are full of oxygen, but in hydric soils, water replaces this oxygen, changing the soil chemistry. Did you know this is why wetlands often smell like rotten eggs? Wetlands are also defined by their plants. Most plant roots and soil bacteria need oxygen to survive, so in hydric soils they will quickly die. But not wetland plants. Wetland plants, also called hydrophytes, can survive and grow with limited oxygen in hydric soils. So all wetlands are made up of water, hydric soils, and hydrophytes. But are all wetlands the same? Many people think of wetlands as marshes, but there are actually many other types of wetlands. Some other common types include swamps, bogs, and fens. A marsh is a regularly flooded wetland with soft-stemmed vegetation. Coastal marshes exposed to tidal flooding are called salt marshes. Few plants can tolerate this harsh environment. Saltmarsh cordgrass is one of the most common saltmarsh plants. Freshwater marshes have much greater plant diversity. Some of the many plant species found in freshwater marshes include cattails, marsh hibiscus, and pickerel weed. A swamp is a forested wetland with woody plants such as trees and shrubs. Sometimes swamps are completely flooded, but many swamps are often just saturated or muddy. Some of the forested wetlands found in the United States include bald cypress swamps in the southeast coastal plain, mangrove forests along southern Florida and the Gulf Coast, and red maple swamps in the northeast U.S. Bogs are mossy rainwater-fed wetlands with a variety of evergreen trees and shrubs. Many other beautiful and interesting plants such as cranberries, orchids, and even the insect-eating Venus flytrap are found in bogs. Bogs are well known for their spongy soil called peat. Peat forms from partially decayed plants and is common in many wetlands. Fens are also peat-forming wetlands, but they are groundwater fed and look more like meadows with many grasses, reeds, and wildflowers. Wetlands were once viewed as stinky insect-ridden wastelands, but we now know that wetlands provide many important benefits. Wetlands act as a natural filter to provide clean water. They help prevent flooding and maintain river flow. And wetlands provide critical habitat for fish and wildlife, as well as beautiful scenery and opportunities for recreation. Wetlands are able to provide these benefits because of the movement of water to and from the wetland. Without wetlands, or the hydrology that supports them, many of these important ecosystem benefits could be lost.
So thank you for, the attention for this little clip. What I'll do is I'll also share this in the chat so you can always look at it again. And I'll also provide you a link for an Indian wetland portal. So perhaps wherever you are in India, by geography, you can look at what your closest wetland is, because there are so many of them, and I'm sure you'll appreciate that. So I hand you over to Satwik now. Satwik, it's all yours now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madhu. And that was such a lovely video. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it makes it very easy for me to sort of jump in and start talking about wetlands. I think we're going to be talking about two things in this session, which is, wetlands and visualization. Cartoons are nothing but, like a quick and like simple way of like visualizing things. You could be like doodling, or you could be, sort of doing rough sketches, or these days we also use memes, we use AI, and like so many other things, like so many other ways of like visualizing, so many ways of like bringing together like words and text to sort of figure out like and communicate what we mean in a better way. So in this context, I think something that I have also started using or learning very recently is this term wetland. And until then, I used to use a whole range of different words to describe, call it like lands near the coast, or we would use, sort of more specific words like, oh, we're working in the Ennur estuary, we're working in the Adyar estuary, or we would talk about like lagoons, backwaters, and, sort of name specific things. And then I came across this term wetlands, and it made so much sense the moment I sort of came across this term. Like, it just became such an easy way of communicating, simply because I think really if we go to most of the coastal areas, and if we go to most of places where river meets the sea, and a whole sort of like ecology gets formed around that sort of meeting of the river and sea, really there's no word that is more apt, because we always, sort of, and this is sort of the thing with words, and that's one of the first things that I want to share in terms of my comic. The thing with words is that like words have like very specific contexts, and we all use the English language to communicate, and this means that a lot of the context for our words comes from a place of like colonization and colonialism. The English language itself is very sort of deeply rooted and deeply tied to colonization, colonialism, and imperialism. So it's actually very it's actually a very interesting thing to try and like use English to like talk about wetlands and all that, because you suddenly realize that we're talking about like a clash of civilizations over here. Like, what we see in wetlands, it's quite something that like words or the words that we are very familiar with like can't quite describe. Um, and why I say this is that so wetlands, as the video sort of says, is this place where lots of different soils interact with lots of different waters. There's like rainwater, there's salt water from the sea, and then there's like fresh water from the lakes and rivers and all that. And then there are various different kinds of like soils, there are various different kinds of like stones, rocks, and all of that. And when all of these things like come together, what happens is that it creates like an incredible potential for life and life forms to sort of like be born and flourish and sort of use that space for like various different purposes. And so what I have come to realize, or what we have come to realize as a collective working in the space of wetlands, is that it's sort of very, very important to change our perspective and kind of try to imagine what wetlands are like from the point of view of the people who live in the wetlands. So in a sense, how I think of myself, like when it comes to like conservation, is that typically when we say conservation, we talk about like conserving nature, we talk about conserving plants, animals, birds, and like various different species. But another sort of way of looking at it is that like what we are really working towards is human conservation, because all of these other things that we're talking about, like conserving, of course, they need to be conserved, but they will exist even without like human beings. But like human beings need all of these things to kind of like exist. And so like wetlands are sort of incredibly like crucial for human life everywhere. And when we really sort of realized that is we started trying to understand like I'm not a environmentalist. I'm not like a wetland conservationist. Any of these things. Like I come from like a place where like you could say that the kind of work that I do is more in the lines of like urban studies or something like that. Like I've always been interested in urban spaces and all that, and I got interested in wetlands only because I realized that urban wetlands are also like urban places, and once again like here we sort of like divide things, right? Like we say like rural, we say urban, we say like land, we say water. But the reality is that like these things are like not really like that separate from each other. Like all of them are sort of like one and the same. And it's really like our perspective that sort of changes. So like, okay, maybe to, sort of better explain like what I mean, I'll just share a comic that I did about like 5 years back. And the comic sort of deals with just this, which is like, how do we tend to think about wetlands and ecologically rich places and the kind of like language that we use to describe the places and the people who live in these places, and what that kind of usage of language and how that kind of like thinking, like where does it lead? And I'll just share the screen. So I thought this would also be like a good way to introduce you guys to the kind of work that I do, because this is what I do. I learn from the wetlands, and then I try to, and then I try to like make comics about it so that other people like me, people who are used to more urban settings, not used to living in these places and like truly being able to appreciate them, so that like we are also able to appreciate what is going on in these places. Yeah, so I'll just share my screen. So can you all see my screen? Yeah, okay. So this happened about like 5 years ago, where American evangelist, an evangelist is like someone who is going from place to place to talk about the mission of Christianity. And this person wanted to really sort of visit this one particular island called the North Sentinel Island in Andaman Nicobar, and sort of preach Christianity over there. And despite repeated sort of warnings from the people living in the island to sort of stay away and not come inside, like he tried to repeatedly sort of enter into that place, and unfortunately he was sort of attacked and killed by the people who lived on the island. And this led to a kind of huge diplomatic kind of uproar, and it got spoken about a lot because this was about this was about an American person like coming to India and then sort of being killed over there, and a lot of people were asking about, will the people who killed him be prosecuted and all that, and there was a lot of discussion around it, and ultimately it came out that nothing could be done about this because we have something called the Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Act of 1956. If you can see that particular comic panel. And the reason these kind of like protections and all that exist is because we live in this kind of like a global world where we assume that we have the right to go everywhere. Everyone has the right to sort of like move around and all that, and not and we don't think a lot about like whether we are really equipped to be looking at and be able to sort of use these places and not abuse them, and be able to build like fair relationships with the people over there and not like exploitative relationships with people over there. And unfortunately, the kind of world that we live in and the kind of history that we sort of come from, our natural way of like interacting with environment, our natural way of interacting with other people has become sort of, very imperial and very exploitative. And that is sort of what this comic is sort of talking about, that when we use words like these people are primitive, that they use systems which are very ancient, traditional, old. If we're talking about like, whether they are civilized or are they like savages, or like what level of civilization is civilization something that sort of progresses according to how we tend to think it progresses. All of these questions sort of come into place, and the answers become sort of very, very messy. Like you can't clearly like think in terms of like right, wrong, good, bad, and who's sort of right, except that you have to sort of like understand that not all places work by the kind of rules that we assume are okay. And more importantly, that we need to understand that when we approach a new place, then we typically sort of like tend to say that like the world is our oyster, we can go anywhere, do anything, but it's not quite the case. Different parts of the world belong to different people, and there are permissions to be acquired before you can do something in a particular place. And this is really like what it all sort of like boils down to. It is about whether you feel like you have the right to be somewhere, or whether you feel like you have to take permission. And really, in the wetlands, back in the day, like when human beings like first started sort of inhabiting these wetlands, and why is something I was just talking about, like, which is that like when all of these kind of like soils and waters and these landscapes sort of mix together, like it creates like an infinite potential for life and life forms to sort of like thrive and all that. So automatically, these were the kind of places that people would always gather around, because there was so much. This was just like, of course, like nature always gives so much everywhere, but this was just like place where like all of the bounty of nature was sort of like clustered, right? And human beings always like found this to be like an incredibly attractive place to be in. And so when people started like seeing these spaces, it would help us to sort of visualize like how people saw it. And the ways people saw it is that like people saw it in terms of these lands being sacred and haunted. So by sacred, like what we mean is that it has like a lot of potential for life. And by haunted, what we mean is that like it has like a lot of potential for the opposite of life, which is death and like danger. So one of the main things that we understood like after like 10 years of like working on wetlands near Chennai is that thinking about wetlands not from sort of more academic points of view, but looking at wetlands more from the point of view of the people who live there is incredibly useful, because colonial language, colonial academics, and all that are like maybe like a few hundred years old, but like but the languages and cultures that people who lived over there have evolved is like thousands and thousands of years old, and they have been sort of tested against like a lot more adversity. Like when we look at the kind of language and academia that we use and the kind of ways that we try to like solve problems, it only tends to like create like more problems. And this is because like we're not particularly like equipped to look at the wetlands the way people who do live over there and who actually like experience those things sort of tend to visualize it. And yeah, so sort of that brings me to my next little thing that I wanted to share. I just stop sharing this. This is just like a visualization of how people who live in wetlands like sort of tend to visualize a wetland. When we look at a wetland, again, like we tend to sort of see the geographical formations of the place. We talk about the land, we talk about the water, we talk about the soil, and all of these things are important too. But what this sort of means is also that a lot of different life forms come over there and come together over there. And these life forms, when they come together over there, it's not like that they're coming as individual life forms. Like all of these are like intensely interrelated to each other. And really like what we call as like the ecology of a particular place is really this web of interrelationship between the various species that sort of cohabit that place. And so what you're seeing over here is webs of interrelationship in a place called Ennur, which is estuary area to the north of Chennai. In fact, it is the northern suburb of Chennai, and it is part of the Greater Chennai Municipal Corporation. Why this place is very, very important is because a major river that passes through Chennai called the Pasisthalia River is sort of deposits into the sea in this particular area, Ennur. And to the north of Ennur is this very, very large freshwater lake called the Pulicat Lake, which supplies water to a huge part of Andhra Pradesh and to Tamil Nadu. So because of the presence of these two, and of course on your east is of course the entire Bay of Bengal. So, it is a land where a lot of very important water systems are kind of meeting. And what happens when, like I said, like when all of these things sort of like come together, there is a lot of potential for like life to flourish. But at the same time, that means that this is a very resource-rich area. And this is what I mean by colonial language is that like, when we talk about a particular place, rather than tend to talk about like the people and animals and plants that like live over there, we try to like speak of the things that are there that we can take from there and use for ourselves in some particular way. So how we tend to sort of like look at these sort of places is we call them resource-rich areas. And when we say that these are resource-rich areas, like what we mean is that these areas are places where the government feels that it is okay for it to come in and set up industries and set up like various other kind of, large factories. They feel that there are large water bodies available nearby. And rather than see these large water bodies as places that can sustain a lot of life, they see these large water bodies as places that can sustain large factories and big thermal power plants and large like sewage treatment plants and saltwater purification plants and like various other like they when normally like people, plants, animals like sea water, they think that hey, this is a place where we can live. Whereas governments who tend to think in imperial terms, when they see like water, they start to think that like, hey, this is a place where we can exploit this area to generate a lot of profit. And so what happens is like these sort of areas become like very highly industrialized. And Ennur is also like one such place like where it's really crazy to think about it, but like there are 6 thermal power plants in Ennur, which is an incredibly high concentration of power plants to generate electricity. And all of these power plants, I mean, you would assume that if there is so much of water around, like maybe we're trying to produce electricity through sustainable means, but no, like these are all thermal power plants, which means that like coal is being brought here from on ships, from like various different places, from road, like from on trains, like from various different places, and it's being burned over here to sort of produce electricity. The burnt coal, the ash is deposited into lakes and ponds in all of these areas. Because of the presence of like these large industries, like what happens is that again, like coming back to like why these places are called like wetlands, right? Like because it's neither land nor water, and it is both. And very importantly, I think one of the most important points made in that like video was that like this doesn't mean that wetlands are always wet. In fact, it means that like wetlands are extremely dynamic. They, sometimes have water, sometimes they don't have water. If there's a few weeks of rain, then there's a lot of water. If there's a few weeks of sunshine, then the water goes away and there's a lot of dry land. So it is a very, very dynamic place. The people who live here, the animals that live here, the plants that live here, they have adapted to this dynamism. Governments, industries, urban areas are static entities. Like they have not adapted to this like dynamism. And this is the fundamental clash that sort of happens when governments and corporates like look at these sort of places versus like people and animals and plants that look at these sort of places. And why I just quickly just want to say this like before we jump into our cartoons and like visualization exercise, like why it's very important to sort of make this fundamental difference between what governments are doing and what people are doing is this, that a lot of times when we talk about environment and conservation, we say that this is a man versus nature conflict, that this is like a man versus animal conflict, or like, this is man versus like trees and like plants. And we sort of use terms like the Anthropocene. We talk about like how the presence of human beings in a particular area is like destroying the ecology in the area and all that. And I think while this is partially true, I think it's extremely important to make a subtle or a nuanced difference that it is not all human beings who, exist in some kind of like a uneasy, conflict-ridden relationship with nature. It is a very, very specific group of human beings. It is a very, very specific sort of institutional structure. And it is a very, very specific sort of an institutional structure that is supported monetarily by people who have a very specific desire to exploit and destroy a particular area. So when we say that, human beings are interfering in nature, I feel that it's very, very important to describe who are these human beings who are interfering with nature. Is it all human beings? Is it people who live there, or is it people who don't live there who are like destroying the place? Because if you would know about like wetlands, or if you think about like river civilizations from like our ancient times and all that, like we'll realize that for millennia and millennia, like human beings have been, living near rivers and in like wetlands, and somehow like wetlands have been at the threat of like extinction only in the last like 100 or 200 years or so. So really, this is not about like humans interfering with nature. It's very, very specific set of humans and a very specific set of like human thinking that kind of like puts humans in conflict with nature, and there is no inherent human nature conflict at all. So with this sort of note, I'll just stop sharing. And before we sort of jump into a little bit of like visualization exercises and like what I mean by cartooning and how cartooning and visualization can help in these sort of places, I'll just take like a minute to see if anyone wants to ask anything, wants to clarify anything. Also comment for like Madhu, is it going fine? Like, can I continue?
Yeah, there are no questions as such in the group, so I think you can continue. If there are any questions, folks, please just put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll call on you. So far, no questions.
So I'll just share another thing, which is what we have done recently is that what the Chennai Corporation typically does is it puts out this thing called a 5-year plan, and or it can be like a Chennai Municipal Master Plan or something of that sort. So what we felt strongly is that the way the government looks at these sort of areas and the exploitative nature of the relationship that governments share with these sort of areas, the way they look at the development of this area is also driven by that kind of like exploitative thinking and like behavior. So we wanted to sort of give a glimpse to people who both live there as well as who live in other parts of Chennai. What does it look like when people who actually live in harmony with nature when they put out a plan for the development of wetlands, how does it look? And how does it look different from when a government puts something forth? So basically, the web of interrelationships graphic that I showed you just now was a part of that. And what we also did is that like we created this thing called like People's Plan for Eco-Restoration of Inward Wetlands. I'll just quickly show that. So we just sort of started off by setting the context so that there would be some kind of baseline understanding between the way technically, academically, the terms that we use and the sort of terms that people who live in the wetlands use. And then we started talking about the landscape over there, and we tried to talk about landscape in terms of mainly what you see over here, which is God, spirits, and ghosts. This might be a very, very different sort of a way of approaching culture than what we are typically used to when we talk about wetlands, or when we talk about ecology. We talk about the kind of natural resources that exist over there, the kind of bird life that exists over there, the kind of animal life that exists over there. But the thing is that talking about birds, animals, plants, water, soil, stones, this is all, again, it's a very westernized, it's a very colonial way of like dividing the landscape. People who live over there like do not divide the landscape in this sort of a way. Rather, what they divide the landscape up is in terms of spirits and ghosts and gods that live over there, because the water, the birds, the animals, the people, they are all not seen as different from each other. They're all seen as life forms that are governed by these gods, spirits, and ghosts, basically. So that is the relevance of God, spirits, and ghosts. And for me, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to sort of like get our heads around to like thinking in this way, because we are always like taught that like, hey, yes, like gods are important, praying to gods and all that is important in terms of tradition, but like, don't like attach some sort of like a reality to it. Like, but this is a sort of a very different sort of different space where you kind of have to, suspend your disbelief and let yourself understand the space from the point of view of the people who live in that space. And for that, like, it's very important to think of these spaces haunted and sacred spaces. For instance, the land that comes, so this beautiful illustration that you see over there, done by Ilavarsan from Government College of Arts, Chennai. This is basically a portrait of an apparition that people in Endur see when they're coming back fishing from the sea. And he's called Sambad Tata. So Sambad Tata is like the Tata who's smoking like a cherut cigarette. So basically, like, he is this Tata who is smoking a cigar, and he is sort of making sure that when people come back to the land from the sea, they aren't just sort of, joking around and talking and being really frivolous. He sort of expects everyone to be silent. And if people don't stay silent, then he sort of like rocks the boat to sort of remind you that, hey, you're supposed to be silent. Now, this is a kind of a little folklore that goes on in the place, but you automatically sort of realize also that like this has some sort of like meaningful value, because the shoals that exist on the coast, which is what you need to cross on your way to like bringing your boat back to the land. Like, these are some of the most dangerous terrains. Like, when you're out in the sea, you're relatively safe, and once you're back in the land, you're relatively safe. But these in-between shoals that you have to cross to come back to land are extremely dangerous. This is where like the sea is the roughest and your boat might capsize and all of that. So they have built this god into their imagination so that when they're crossing this extremely dangerous area, young people, like especially kids who are going for the first time on their like boat or who are relatively like inexperienced, this is a story that the older experience. So the way fishing also over here is like the father-in-law and the son-in-law go fishing together. So, this is a story that the father-in-law tells the son-in-law in order to like, make sure that the young people are not getting overexcited and sort of like getting the boat to capsize in a very like sort of a dangerous sort of a spot. So this is just like one example that I'm giving. Okay, so this next image that you see over here is the so these are basically guardian deities, and every year these deities are sort of made from the soil over there, and they're lined up outside the village, and these are believed to give protection to the village. But again, if we want to think about this from the point of view of like how we would talk about like in academic terms, then what this is essentially doing is it is generating an economy. It's generating like cultural economy of the place, and it is sort of creating a town center where people can come to sort of solve various problems of theirs to freely like give and take things that they would like need each other. So it's basically creating and recreating a village economy. So we can talk about it in terms of like creating a village economy, but from the point of view of like wetlands, it's not, things are not on such like simple and academic terms. Like these are rooted with their like belief systems and their religions. So that's basically what we were trying to get at. That, in order to access resources in this area, you can't just build factories and steal the resources from these gods and goddesses. People who live over here, they have created generations and centuries of like traditional actions, which are very important to derive permission from these nature gods, from these spirits and from these ghosts, in order to take permission from them to use the natural resources. This is exactly why when people live over there and fish over there and hunt over there and do agriculture, do pastoralism over there, for thousands of years, land does not get deteriorated the way it does. Like when we set up a factory, in a few years, the entire landscape is sort of like destroyed, and it takes like generations again for like any sort of restoration activity to happen over there. The reason that they say this happens is because we don't know how to take permission from the spirits, from the gods and the goddesses, and use resources that are available over there moderately and carefully in such a way that these things do not get ultimately sort of destroyed. And one very beautiful story that Fisher told told all of us, was that they go to a particular place to fish, and they sort of the first fish that they catch, they apply turmeric to it and sort of put it back into the sea. And the moment they put it back into the sea, thousands of fish just sort of jump up, and they all sort of literally start jumping into the boat. And the Anna who was speaking to me, he was a young man at that point of time. He said, "Oh my God, like there are so many fish over here. We should literally, just try to get in like as many fish as we can, and take all this back. We never have to come back over here." And the elders over there laughed and said, like, no, that's not what we do, because the God gives us this plenty because the God knows that we will only take what we need and we'll only come back when we need. We are not going to take more than what we need. And this is the kind of understanding that exists between humans and nature. And that is when, these ecologies remain stable. And when we forget this, and when we believe that, hey, why don't we just extract everything that we can today and store it with ourselves and use it in the future, when we start thinking about it that way, then that is when the ecological harmony begins to sort of, get disrupted. So I'll just quickly go through the rest of the report. The rest of the report is also just, it was just us trying to sort of explain, like, how does a report look different when we do it with academic interest in mind versus like when we're talking about people's aspirations and we're trying to relay people's aspirations to other people. And essentially, like what it happens is that like it becomes less about statistics. It becomes less about enumeration of like various resources and the economies that they generate. Instead, it becomes more about people and their stories and their belief systems and their happinesses and their sadnesses, the times that they ceremonially celebrate something good that has happened, and they ceremonially celebrate something sad that has happened. All of these things are intimately tied into the landscape of the place. And really, if what we sort of are also trying to drive home as a point is that, like, if we can call anything as an economy of a wetland, then really it is this. the economy of a wetland is the gods, the goddesses, and the rivers and the lakes and the ponds and the animals and the plants, like all of these things together. This is really the economy of the place. The ways that they are all interrelated to each other. This is the economy of the place. And really, this is not something that, we sort of like realize abstractly. This is literally what people over there like tell us. Like, for instance, if we say, okay, what is the economy of Ennur? We'll start listing out the 6 thermal power plants. We'll talk about, the various companies that have like set up like chemical industries over there, like medical industries over there and all of that. If you ask a person who lives in Ennur, what is the economy of Ennur? They'll start telling you about the various fishing villages that exist on the coast of Chennai and how people from their village are married into families of the other villages. This is really the economy that they look at. When they go out and fish and when they go out and like catch prawns and like bring it back and all that, they're not doing it in order to, like sell it in the market. They're actually doing it because they're all interrelated and like married to each other and they have obligations. When you catch fish, you don't go and sell it in the market. You will give it to your long list of relatives in the order of, like it starts with the grandfather and then like, the paternal uncles and then like so on and so forth. And finally, like what remains is what you keep to yourself. So, when we talk about the economy, we talk about economy as rational self-interest, right? Like that's what like markets and capitalism tell us economics is. It is about like, it is that area of life where human beings think in terms of like self-interest and in terms of like profiteering motives. Whereas the way people here look at economy is completely different. In fact, like they say that economy is that area of life where we don't act in self-interest. Economy is that area of life where we always think about other people before we think about ourselves. And that is really like the fundamental
I just wanted to give you a time check. It's 7:42.
Oh, sorry.
And yeah, and a quick question was, is this available for us to look at it more? Is it online somewhere, Satwik?
Yeah,
The
so
report?
I can
Okay.
just share this with you.
Okay.
Sorry, like there's something that we worked on recently, so I can go on and on, but I'll quickly,
Yeah,
I'll just share, I'll share this with,
because yeah, because I don't think we'll do justice to this beautiful report. So what I can do is if you put it in the WhatsApp for me, I'll put it in the chat whenever you get a chance. And yeah, sorry.
so yeah, so I think broadly made my point, and why I was talking about all of this is to come to the visualization exercise that I had like planned for us, which is something that we call as emotional mapping. The idea is that when you look at a map, like say the one over here, so a lot of like what these sort of maps don't show is the things that are really important over there, which is the people and the places and the plants and the animals and all that. Like it rather like it's a top view of a landscape in such a way that we can quickly count the resources over there and all that. So what we instead sort of encourage people to do is do something known as like emotional mapping, where they map a place not like how we would map a place through a satellite image, but map a place the way we would experience it and use it. So I hope everyone has paper and pencil with them. No?
Yeah, I think we have. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
they have.
Okay. So so I encourage you all to like just sort of close your eyes and visualize your neighborhood. So think about your house and think about a very important place in your neighborhood that you go to frequently. Now, this could be your school, this could be the bank, it could be a shop that you frequent. It could be a bunch of different places that you go to frequently. So just imagine your neighborhood, your house, and the neighborhood around it, and draw a map of your house and your neighborhood in such a way that you're not actually pointing out the things that are there, but you're kind of like emoting how you feel about those particular places. To give an example, when I did this exercise at a previous wetlands conference in Pondicherry, one very interesting thing that uh, o- one of the participants did was she named all of the roads in terms of her emotions. So she spoke about a happy road, and the road was basically this place that she went on a walk with her dog, and there were little children over there who really like playing with the dog, and they feed the dog biscuits. And she was talking about an angry road. The angry road was like a place where uh, there were a lot of residents, like who really did not like dogs being in the area, so they would get like really tense and sort of like move away. So she was experiencing, so because her primary activity was taking her dogs on a walk from her house, she was experiencing that entire place through the emotion of what she feels like when she's with her dog. Um, Similarly, in other cases, places that we like going to appear like much closer, places that we don't like going to appear much farther away. Places that look places that we frequent look very easy to sort of go to, and places that we don't frequent look extremely complicated to sort of go to. When we map places, what we do is we solve all of these issues. We solve for all of this and say, hey, no, these are all of my feelings. This is not objective reality. Objective reality is the correct distance from this place, what all government constructed roads exist from one place to another. And this is how we like usually think of these things. So let us put aside like this kind of thinking for a minute. Just close our eyes and try to visualize the neighborhood around us as an emotional space. So what does it feel like when we step out of our house and walk down the road and do various activities around our house? What does it feel like to us? What does it look like to us? Not as objective realities, but as the reality of our feelings. So I'll just let you guys explore that. And meanwhile, if anybody has doubts about what I mean, please ask me. And in clarifying your doubt, I might, end up making this clear to a lot of other people also what I mean by doing this. Is a slightly abstract exercise. It's a slightly sort of, again, like I said, it is an emotional exercise, so it's a little messy. It's not as clear cut as objective exercises are because it's not meant to bring clarity to us. Rather, it's supposed to make us aware of how not clear things are and like how interconnected and how messy everything is. That's sort of the objective, and that's sort of what emotional mapping also does. Like that, like it sort of helps us put the messiness of our emotions down on paper. And once we are able to visualize our emotions, then we are able to sort of like understand like what these places and what these things mean to us. And when we truly come to terms with what these like places mean to us, then the kind of solutions that we come up with in order to solve our problems related to these things look very, very different from the way we typically tend to do right now. And this is something that we realized through 10 years of work in Ennore. And, I sort of thought that that work is best coalesced in the form of this emotional mapping exercise, because really like that's what we understood in these 10 years, which is that all of that the best way to sort of relate to a place is bring all of our emotions into that place and really understand the place from the point of view of our emotions rather than from the point of view of some facts, and then trying to figure out like what those facts are and like which facts are important, which facts are not important. Like all this becomes academic study. Whereas if we are approaching things from the point of view of our emotions, then we don't have to like study anything. We know what emotions are important to us because these are our emotions. So like this is a way in which like we make academic and dense topics easier to understand by sort of not approaching them academically, but rather approaching them through our emotions and understanding for ourselves what are important to us, rather than trying to understand what some other authoritative person or like some intelligent scientist or someone told us, like, this is important, think from this point of view. No, we can, emotionally interpret these places and like try to figure out for ourselves what is important for us so that we're in a better position to evolve solutions that work for us.
So I don't know if I think I got a wrong pen, but I feel all boxed in. So I don't know, all that came out was some kind of a crossroad and me surrounded by boxes. I don't know if it makes sense, but yeah, that's what I'm feeling right now.
Thanks for sharing that. Like, because that actually reminds me of my first sort of architecture class in college, like where this professor went on this rant about like square shapes. He was like, "What is this? Like, why is everything box after box after box? This even the sheet of paper on which we are drawing our architecture, sort of things. This is a box. We use like scales and like other instruments to draw boxes. The world, like we step out of our houses and like the houses are in the shapes of box. The roads are in the shapes of box. Neighborhood are in the shapes of box. Like, what is up with all these boxes? Like so. What you told me sort of really reminds me of that rant, and really calling it rant is also like really good because like usually we're told like, hey, don't rant, that is emotional, right? Like calm down and like try to put out your thoughts in a more objective way. So we're throwing that out. Like it's really great that you put a lot of boxes, and I would also like encourage you to kind of like rant about it a little bit more. Like what about the boxes feels claustrophobic, or can you tell us a little bit more about the emotions connected with these boxes? Uh,
I'm trying to ask if anybody else wants to share. But yeah, I think it's just a feeling of not being able to go outside because it all looks very similar. So maybe that's the emotion I'm feeling, that I can't see anything different. Maybe I'm not seeing it clearly. But yeah, anybody else who wants to share? There's a comment from Shravani. She says, it's an intriguing activity. I never thought of a place I love and live around in terms of emotions. So we'll be definitely be doing this. And Sandhya asks if you, if you could
and
um yeah, something about the hand, yeah.
I think you're talking about the tamarind trees. Is this one that you're Is it this?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was just intrigued by what that was. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So again, this is also so a tamarind tree. Why it is there in the shape of a hand and all that. I think um, it'll be really good if you can just sort of read the story and kind of maybe try to understand for yourself like why the artist has made it in that way, because so I was the curator of this exhibition, and I worked with a bunch of artists who produce these artworks. But I will uh, tell a little bit about the background of the thing. So this is the same thing. So when we're talking about a wetland, we talk about how each element of the wetland is actually the sum total of the entire wetland. And each of them has a sort of a restorative function towards the wetland. And a really great example of trying to understand like how each element of a wetland like restores the wetland, it is very good for us to look at tamarind trees, or at least this is what the elders of the village tell us, that if you want to understand like really like what a wetland does, how a wetland nourishes people, and even when some kind of like a disaster happens to a wetland, like how does the wetland sort of heal itself? A healing of a wetland happens through particular kind of like species, both plants and animals. And one of the most important plants that sort of clearly shows how wetlands restore themselves and how they heal themselves, that is a tamarind tree. And the way the tamarind tree roots go into the soil, the way they sort of meet the roots of other plants over there, and the kind of like bacteria that exist over there, and the way they re-nitrogenize the soil, the way they oxygenate the soil, um, the way the tamarind that comes, how it is sort of such an essential thing that we sort of like put tamarind water in like various preparations in our food. all of these things, like a tamarind tree, once you plant a tamarind tree, and this is basically like what the elders were telling us, that like, when we want to sort of see whether our neighborhood is healthy or not, we look at the tamarind tree. If the tamarind trees in the area are healthy, then the neighborhood is like really healthy. Similarly, like there are some species in the sea, like crabs, for instance, in Indore. Like crabs, they're called ghost crabs and hermit crabs, but mainly ghost crabs over here. So these ghost crabs and like hermit crabs, like basically, if they are there in plenty and they seem to be flourishing and new crabs are being born and all of that, that means that the landscape is very, very is healthy and is able to restore itself regularly. If these crabs disappear from the place, then we know that there is something terribly wrong that is happening over there, and we need to sort of investigate what is going wrong. And basically they study what is wrong with their wetlands by looking at the various species over there. So the tamarind tree is one of the things, and again, the hand, if I might offer an explanation, is basically about how it is the basis of life, and like how the hand of protection basically is what the artist was visualizing while creating this. Similarly, you would have seen I hope you've seen a crab thing also. But anyway, okay, yes. Yeah. So this is the fiddler crab over there. So fiddler crab is an animal species, or like a sea species, that is very, very important for the ecology because again, the way it lives its life, the way it replenishes the soil around it, the way they eat food and then like excrete it, and like what that eating and excretion does for the ecology. Like this is another way through which the ecology restores itself and like keeps itself like healthy. So again, like knowing about like fiddler crabs and like the clams over there, like this is a very important way in which we understand how and this how ecologies are. And this is sort of also why there is a repeated entreaty from their side to like think about like all of these things like emotionally, and like why also like they imagine that there are like gods and like spirits and all that, is so that like this emoting exercise becomes like a lot easier. It is so that like we are not tempted to once again like think about these things as like just crabs are not just things that we consume or we eat. Like as much as it is important for us to eat, it is important for us to like conserve too. Really, there is like no difference between like consumption and conservation. The difference between consumption and conservation sort of comes in when there is excess and when there is like exploitation. But such a difference doesn't exist when there is like harmony. And these are the lessons that they're like kind of they're taught. Yeah. So, oh, okay. So I think Smita here is saying that we're told that tamarind trees give out carbon dioxide and people hallucinate around the tree. I am not sure if this is true, but like it's very interesting that we talk about this because once again, like a tamarind tree is one of the most haunted trees of the area. There are a lot of very, very scary, superstitious kind of like stories that exist around like tamarind trees, even in the area also. So that's so these stories are the modes through which like they like the elders of the village regulate the use of these spaces and all of that. Like so, when we hear about these fantastical sort of like stories and all that, like it's not necessary for us to like take it like literally. Like rather, we understand that okay, like these fantastical stories exist because something important is being told about this particular place, and then we can investigate further and talk to elders more. Like when you talk a little bit to them, then they tell about this in the form of this like superstitious language and all that. Like, but when you sit down with them and talk to them over like a long period of time, then they'll tell you the logic. Then they'll tell you like why they tell these like scary stories and like what these what is the real moral which is like underlying it and like all of that. Like so it's also about spending time with them, and it's about like realizing that there is a lot of wisdom that they have to offer, and like having that curiosity to like learn from them. That sort of takes the mysticism apart and like tells us like the real truth. Like when they initially talk about it, it's all shrouded in like all kinds of exciting, fantastical language. In Kerala, the folklore goes.
So yeah, I don't see anybody else sharing their little what do you call it? I think people are gonna do that as homework, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sure. Like whatever.
I don't mind
people
sharing.
prefer.
I have done something. If we have time.
Yeah.
Please.
Put you come
Yeah.
on
my
camera
camera?
and then
Yeah. Oh, we're a small group, so I'll go ahead anyway. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I'm also an illustrator, and I illustrated my house. It's kind of hodgepodge. I'm sorry. My house is here, and it's sea facing. So I've kind of drawn the sea and the clouds over there. And then just as it was coming out, I realized there's just so much happening. There's construction happening over here, and there's a gang of dogs that lives there too. So actually, it's just like I noticed that I started drawing the trees. So there's shirley, there's jacaranda, there's bougainvillea, there's I noticed these a lot. I noticed that there's vines on the telephone poles over there. And then, somewhere along the way, I just like, oh, wait, I don't have space for the houses. So there aren't too many houses, though the whole street is lined with houses. But yeah, there are cows here that roam around a lot. Poor things, they get caught up in a lot of accidents. And then as you go down the road, there are these very loud motorists. And then we have like aisles of floating trash. So I kind of get what you said about things that really annoy me are really large in this picture. And yeah, this little house by the corner. Like, so yeah, it's really interesting to see what's come out of it. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. It's really, really amazing. Thank you. So it's really, really nice, especially because just looking at it kind of reminded me about what I really love about this visualization exercise, and like why I keep going back to it again and again. Even if people ask me, I keep talking about it again and again, because um, when we look at maps from top view, right, like then they have already been flattened for us, right? Like we're already looking at like something that's already flat. But when we change that perspective from top view to any other sort of a view, it's incredible how everyone has a different perspective. Like, when we're talking about like top view, everyone draws the map in the same way. But the moment we say like, hey, don't do it in top view, the ways of expression that comes out is just, I mean, it's mind-boggling the way people think about like the space around them. And another thing also is on a sheet of paper, we have to kind of like flatten it, right? Like, and flattening it essentially means that some things become smaller and some things become bigger. Even in our like world map, when we like sort of flatten it, all the European countries become really bigger, and all the global south becomes like really tiny. If there's a very common rant that I keep going on about like maps, that like the colonial language of maps like reproduces this way also, that the way we flatten the map of the earth also is in such a way that previously the colonizing countries look bigger than the colonized sort of countries, while the opposite is the truth. But essentially, like what it is about is like when we represent something in 2 dimension, we necessarily have to flatten things out. And when we flatten things out, when we look at it from top, everything can be the same size. But when we change the perspective and we have to flatten things out, then necessarily some things have to be big and some things have to be small. And then the emotion comes in. Like, then what do we make big and what do we make small? And our emotions like really start playing over there. And in fact, like this kind of an exercise, when I do, like it sort of becomes a self-realization exercise for me. I draw it and then I'm like, oh, okay, so I actually care about this much. Like, it's also something that I'm realizing as I do this exercise. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
So I have a question with regard to illustrations, right? So these are all very serious subjects. These are all, you want to emote certain things. So when we bring in, say, a caricature illustration, does it take away from the seriousness of the issue, or do you think humor and satire helps bring forward a messaging that you want to highlight, just like a larger figure and a smaller figure is, how do you use the caricatures and humor or distortions? How does that come in?
Yeah, I think you put the question like really perfectly. Like I think yes, the distortions that are inevitable. Um, so the thing is that you know the top view. Why I bring that up again and again is that like there is a certain objectivity to it. There is this idea that hey, we are not supposed to distort, but distortions are inevitable. So we end up like distorting it in some way or the other while claiming some sort of like an objectivity. Rather, what I'm saying, like whether it comes to like caricatures or cartoons or like anything, is distortion is inevitable. Distortion will always happen. We like what is really important is for us to have like control over like what we distort, rather than like look towards some authoritative figure and say like, okay, what kind of distortions are they allowing us to do, and like keeping ourselves like within that space, right? And to answer your question like more directly, I think humor is resilience, and humor is hope. And when we talk about serious subjects, when we talk about like life-threatening issues, when we're talking about like livelihoods and lives of like entire like villages and populations getting decimated because of like corporate and government greed, then really the only thing that can save us in such a horrific landscape is humor. And like it is the ability to kind of like laugh. And this laughter and like humor can take shape of like very dark humor, or like very sort of cynical humor from time to time. Just the other day, we were going on this, we were surveying this area like where lakes were being dredged to make roads illegal. Lakes were being illegally dredged to make illegal roads, and that lake was essential for the agriculture of this one organic farmer, who had stopped using pesticides some 3-4 years ago and had started doing organic farming. And now because they're doing this thing over there, now he's like, next year I probably have to go back to pesticide farming because like I can't sustain organic farming if this lake is sort of like goes away. And as he was telling us all this, we were standing over there trying to take notes and all that. He turns to his friends and starts talking about like IPL and how he really wants. He's really worried about like what Bangalore is about to do. And then his teacher, his tuition teacher actually, like who was one of the community leaders over there, like he got very angry and he said, "Look at this, you guys are like so distracted with IPL and all that, and these guys are like taking away all of your lands and everything of that sort." And he sort of like chuckled and he said like, yeah, I know that's like happening, but while all that is happening, I hope Bangalore goes to playoffs. Like, so like I found this whole exchange to be like extremely, it's such a serious topic, and he's literally talking about his livelihood, right? Like nobody cares about it like more than him. But the only way he responds to this, and the way that he finds resilience in face of like all of these attacks is once again through humor. So I feel that in these, I've been working in this space for about like 10 years, and even before that, like I was working as a journalist, and there's this constant barrage of like being a journalist or like being a social activist. Like it's about you necessarily tend to focus more on the bad than the good. Like even though there is a lot of good around in the world and around us, like our jobs sort of force us to focus on the bad rather than the good. And in this sort of scenario, especially, humor becomes a way for us to sort of like replenish our emotions. Sometimes you can feel drained of your emotions also. A lot of times, like one thing is that like we are encouraged not emote enough, but once we start emoting, we might even feel drained of our emotions. And like just like the tamarind tree sort of like replenishes the groundwater and like the nutrients in the soil in a particular area. Similarly, like humor is that thing for us. Like, it does so much more than the sum total of like activities that we see. It nourishes our mind, it nourishes our body, it nourishes our spirit in so many different ways. So while it can seem a bit childish or silly or even crude to bring in humor when such serious issues are taking place, really, if we want to sustain ourselves over a long term and actually are interested in looking at this work as a part of our lifestyle and not just like a job that we do, then it is impossible to not bring humor into the equation. Humor is the only thing that can, keep us resilient, keep us hopeful, and like keep us sort of working in this space. Anybody else wants to share the maps that they've done? I think there's a lot more on the chat about like the guardian spirits and guardian deities from various places, and yeah, really, if all of you get a chance, like please learn about the guardian deities. Please learn about the mother goddesses. Please learn about the spirit gods in your particular area. Please find out like which trees in your area are sacred, which trees in the area are like haunted, and like what all of this means. And really, then you will really start to understand the real economy. We sort of think that innovation and human progress happens through economic activity. Yes, human progress happens through economic activity, but what is this economic activity? Is this the economic activity of industries, or is this the economic activity of plants, animals, and human beings, and ghosts and spirits? Which is the economy that we are really talking about? Which is the economy that innovates and gives us progress, and which is the economy that destroys us and creates more problems for us? So that is really the question that we are asking over here, and that is the question that these spirits and these ghosts and these monsters, they keep asking us this question, which is the real economy? Is it the economy of trade and commerce, or is it the economy of human relationships?
So I got one in my inbox, but I can't seem to attach it here. So maybe I'll send it to you later on. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Or even if you can share your screen, maybe that we can.
Let me see. Uh,
Yeah, but if you're
Can you
pressed for
see
time.
it?
Oh, yes. Oh, wow.
So this was
This is lovely.
so this was in my inbox, and it is neighborhood. There's a lot of faces, and there's a house, some hearts, and there's a backyard, and trees and shrubs. So I see. I think I see something that you mentioned about small faces and big faces. So something. Neighborhood houses are coming up as big, and then the road with lots of shops and cars with uh, smaller emotion. Anybody else wants to share?
I think Sandhya would like to share.
Sandhya, you have your uh,
Sandhya, you're muted, actually.
Sandhya, unmute yourself. Interstellar.
So
Maybe you can.
I'm actually very slow at drawing. So I just drew the places I regularly visit, which is my parents' home and my aunt's home and my studio in my farm. But and this is the first time I'm trying something like this. But after you explained, it really surprised me that my home is see, I've drawn it so big, and all the other homes, my parents' home is much bigger, but it's so small here. So my farm is big, so it's just a pathway. So, but nice exercise. Should spend more time to do it properly, I feel.
Yes. Yeah. I think I had also in trying to build a preamble to the exercise, I had also taken a lot of time. But if you yeah, I think this is something as we do more and more and spend more time in it. Like I think it's also personally very rewarding, as you pointed out. Sort of how things that are dear to us sort of look much bigger, and like what our neighborhood means to us. Even in the previous one, where there were like a lot of smiley faces and a lot of hearts and like all of that, sort of really looking at our own spaces with like emotions, like it just, at least for me, like personally, it's a very transformative experience, which is why like I keep trying to like bring it into all contexts.
Yeah. So there's a question in the chat. Renuka says, I'm a beginner and started making comics. I have a question. How do you ensure that your work is reaching people, especially the non-believers of conservation? I think that's a very apt question.
Uh, so, uh, so okay. I think I'll try to answer this as simply as I can. I think one of the ways in which I had started doing this was that I did one sample comic, uh, about some particular topic. A friend of mine wrote the text, and then I drew the comic. And what we did was we just started cold emailing a lot of publications. And this is something that I also do from time to time, both in India and abroad. Like wherever there was any online magazine or any newspaper, anybody who sort of said that, like, we accept like visual entries, we would send them saying that, like, we have an article that we're writing in the form of a comic. And soon people started sort of responding to us. And I think like one way in which like you ensure that your work is reaching such people is like mass media and like mass communication, I think. And so like online social media becomes very important, like online web portals, like various journalism outlets on the internet, like they become very important. There are newspapers and magazines and all that also. So it's a way of like building up also. Like you'll initially get your break in smaller organizations, but once you do those things, like bigger organizations will notice. And then or using your work with smaller organizations as a portfolio, you can then like send it to bigger organizations. But if we are lucky, like some big organization might be willing to work with us right at the beginning also. But yeah, there's a lot of hit and trial method. But I do want to like sort of mention one thing, which is again a personal learning, is that there will always be people who don't agree with us or who don't believe in conservation or something like that. The thing is, in the world that we live around, it's very hard to not understand the value of conservation and not understand the value of these things, right? So if someone is still not changed their mind, they're still not like believing in it, like maybe they're doing so for some other reasons other than logical reasons that you can use to convince them. So what I also like sort of realized is that organizing with people who agree with us is a much more rewarding activity than trying to convince people who don't necessarily like agree with us. It is of course very essential. We should never fall into echo chambers where we only like talk to and interact with people who only agree with us. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying that, like, yes, we have to reach out to people who don't agree with us, but agreement is also very nuanced. Even in the people who agree with us, there are more nuanced points of agreements that we can reach through interactions. So rather than sort of put a lot of effort into trying to convince people who absolutely don't want to be convinced or who have absolutely different points of view, I think organizing is very interesting, where we meet people who roughly believe what we believe in, but there is no 100% agreement. Then we start talking to each other, we start sharing material with each other, and then we sort of reach some sort of like agreement. And when I used to write for when I used to do these for like newspapers and like magazines and all of that, this is what I really realized, that people who don't agree with me put some kind of like funny trolly comment on my comic, and then just like they sort of move on, like they aren't really interested in engaging with me. The people who really want to argue with me, who want to have a conversation with me, who want to keep going on about the topic, they're people who are not people who disagree with me. They're kind of like people who sort of agree with me, but who want to reach some other like better level of agreement in terms of like, what we, and that I think is a much more nourishing space to be in rather than butt heads against people who don't want to listen to us. Like that's a personal experience I wanted to share. Thanks.
So thanks. Yeah, she also thanks you for the answer. Then no, all right. So we are at 8:20, and I know that you've given us so much of your time. But I really wanted to appreciate and I think we could go on for another hour and truly get into the topic. But I hope that it's just an introduction to folks here that art can be used in a way that you don't have to write scientific reports to get to people. You can also use art and illustrations. So if there are any other last questions, we can take some. If not, before I forget, a lot of people asked if we can see that report of the Chennai management, and if you share it with me, I can email it to them, so that way, folks can get it.
Yes. So yeah, please, I would really love it if all of you read it. And we also tried to make the report in a very, very readable way. So I can assure you that the amount of technical information that we're using is just like restricted to some introduction and all that. Once you get past that, you'll realize that it's just a set of stories. It's just a set of like very beautiful short stories from Ennur. So please do read it.
All right. All right. So thank you, Satwik. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And it's such a large topic. I'm sure it's like an appetizer to all the work that you guys have been doing for the last, as you said, for the last 10 years in this field. And wish you the very best. And again, thank you for your time. And thank you to everybody who attended. And yes, we will share the recording. It'll be on a YouTube channel of all the events that we've done today. There are nearly like 10 events. So we definitely will share it, and we'll send an email to those who registered. So we'll definitely send it off to you. All right.
I just want to take a moment to thank the organizers. Organizers, thank you, Madhu, for calling
No,
me. And thank you all for being here. Like it was really such a pleasure to talk to all of you. And thanks for your participation and for all of the comments and like questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Have a good evening.